folks, this is State Representative Ryan Warner. I want to thank you for tuning in here to our legislative report. Today we are at West Overton Village, and with me today is the CEO, Jessica Katie Barclay. And Jessica, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for coming out.
I appreciate it. And so you just want to briefly tell us what's here at the grounds. What's at West Overton Village?
Everything. West Overton Village, as it stands today, is 19 historic structures spread over 12 acres. And we include a distillery museum. We have a historic house built in 1838. We have the birthplace of Henry Clay Frick, a very large, big barn where we do wedding venues and things like that, and we're also opening an educational whiskey distillery.
Okay, you mentioned that you do venues at your barn here. You want to just briefly go over your funding sources? Do you receive state funding? Is it independently funded?
So we primarily are self-funded. We receive about less than 5% of state funds, but we are very thankful for what we do get.
And tourism is one of Pennsylvania's leading industries. In fact, I think it's number 2 right now currently in the state. So could you briefly just describe the impact that West Overton Village has on the local economy, and what does it bring out as far as appreciation for local history?
That's a good question. What I'm seeing is, between all of the different reasons for people coming out, we see about 30,000 people right now annually. They come for many different reasons. We have, of course, the weddings where we see a lot of people. We also do tours of these buildings. We're seeing people from all over. We're getting a lot of Pittsburgh, we're getting DC people, but we've had international visitors as well. What I'm trying to do with West Overton as we build this up, I know that it will impact the restaurants and the bed and breakfasts and all the other tourism-related industries right down here in our area.
So, Jessica, I understand that you want to tie in agriculture to the site, and I know that agritourism is becoming a big part of tourism in general. So would you go into, describe what the importance of agritourism here at the facilities?
As you know, West Overton is located in a primarily agricultural area. So what we're looking to do to tie in our tourism visitors with the agricultural community is first and foremost with our distillery. So we are expecting to make about 600 gallons of distilled spirits annually for the first few years of this, but we're looking to source that grain within very specific region, within 15 miles of our site. Additionally, with all of the wedding venues and facility rentals that we do, we're looking to ask the caterers or require the caterers to use at least 2 agricultural products, either grown here on site or within that same radius. So dairy, grain, grow carrots here on site, wine, beer from the local wineries and breweries right down here in this area.
Well, that's terrific. And thank you for everything that you do here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we are now going to go on a tour through the facilities with Logan. We are now with Logan Holmes, who is a museum coordinator here at the grounds. And Logan's going to give us a tour of the facilities. And Logan, why don't you just start us off and tell us where we're at now?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, Representative Warner, welcome to West Overton Village.
Thank you very much.
Before we get started and go through the house, I'd like to take a moment just to talk to you about the history of the village and then some of the things we'll see within. So this village community started in 1803. It was founded by a German Mennonite immigrant family called the Overholts. The Overholts settled in Philadelphia in the 1700s. So they were a Mennonite community who had largely moved from Switzerland and Germany to join a growing community of Anabaptists and other pacifist religions that had settled in Pennsylvania. But as we know, by the end of the 1700s, we started to have a few conflicts of our own. So the Mennonites started to find other communities to join to escape participating in conflicts. So the Overholts settled here in 1803. When they moved here, they were joining an existing community of many other Mennonites who had started to settle here a few years prior. When they moved here, they built a farmstead and then built up the village around the farm. So they integrated various businesses in the village, such as a weavery, a general store, other things, so that they could bolster the profits of their farm. So the original founder of the village was a man named Henry Kolb Overholt, originally Heinrich Overholtz, or before he anglicized his name. Henry passed away just 10 years after settling here, and it's his son Abraham who is our main character. Abraham lives here until 1870, and he's responsible for expanding the village from a small Mennonite farming community to that of a large, growing industrial town. So when his father ran the village, it was built up around the farmstead. But under Abraham, he switched the focus to that of the Distillery Museum across the street, the building we just came from. The distillery here is what made the Overholts their wealth. So he built up the village to include businesses to integrate all ends of the distillery. So the grains were grown on site and then ground in the grist mill. Then those grains would become the whiskey. Once the whiskey was produced, those grains were still viable for use, so they fed them to livestock, which they then sent to Pittsburgh for slaughter for food. Now, Abraham lived until he was 86. In the 1800s, this is a rather extraordinary lifespan. So he outlived a number of his children, and his primary partner, his eldest son Henry, died just 6 months after he did. So it's really his grandchildren who become the next generation or the managerial class of West Overton Village and the local communities in Scottdale, Mount Pleasant, etc. So the most famous of whom is his grandson Henry Clay Frick. So we'll talk about Frick more as we go through the tour. We're going to see 3 buildings here in the immediate Homestead complex. So we'll be going into the homestead that Abraham and his wife Mariah built in 1838, as well as the summer kitchen behind me where all of the cooking would be done. The last building we'll see is the spring house, which was basically an early form of refrigeration, which would later be converted into a cottage, which is where Henry Clay Frick was born. So lastly, before we go into the house, I want to talk about how we became here as a museum. So after Abraham passed away, one more generation would live in the homestead until 1921. At this point in time, Henry Clay Frick himself has passed away, and his daughter Helen, who is his primary heir, takes that money and spends the next 60 years of her life as a philanthropist. So she's responsible for opening the Frick Art Collection in New York and us as a museum in 1928. So when we go through the house, we'll see a lot of the changes that Helen made as she preserved the house as a museum for future generations.
Well, that's terrific. I'm looking forward to seeing all the buildings, but I guess this is our first stop. And
Absolutely. We'll be going into the homestead now,
okay,
whenever
perfect.
you're ready.
You guys want to join us? Let's go.
Come with me.
Logan, we are now in the original homestead. So do you want to just give us a description of what this building is all about and the different rooms that we're going to see here?
Sure. So we're going to go into about 4 rooms of this house before we move on to the outbuildings outside. So we've just come in, although this is the most iconic shot of the house with the stairs and the pillars on the front porch, we've just come in the family entrance of the home. So originally, if you were entering as a guest in this house in 1838, you'd go into the parlor to be received by Abraham and his wife Mariah. But since we've already broken a little bit of tradition by coming in the family entrance, I'm going to take you into the master bedroom first so we can meet the couple who built the home.
Terrific.
So please follow me in here.
All right.
Well, welcome to the master bedroom of the couple who built this home and much of the village. You can see the smiling couple on either side of the bed, Abraham and Mariah. They always warm my heart when I come in here. So Abraham and Mariah, as I've said, built this house in 1838. So at the time they build this house, they are both in their mid-50s. They've already become fairly wealthy for what was still a relatively rural community, pretty far removed from Pittsburgh, etc. So when they built this house, this is considered a mansion for the time and certainly the setting. But since we are still a little bit outside of Pittsburgh, Abraham and Mariah had a hand in laying the foundation of the house rather than it being designed by an architectural firm, as would be employed by, for instance, Abraham's grandchildren, such as Henry Clay Frick, who built many fabulous mansions throughout the country. So this building's relatively simple in design. It's just a 4-room floor. So it's called 4-over-floor floor plan for the fact that there's a room on each corner. And here from this bedroom, Abraham could observe his village. So his distillery across the street, the farm, eventually his other businesses such as the weavery, the general store, the coal mine, etc.
Okay. And this room would, the way we see it now, would this be this would be a historical replication of the way it existed when it was originally built?
Yes, this interpretation is done as such because of family diaries that are still with us today.
Okay.
So when we were founded as a museum in 1928, Helen Frick, our founder, set us up as the Westmoreland Fayette Historical Society. So on the floor above us is our archive that contains many family diaries. One such diary from a family member who lived here actually contains sketches and diagrams of the house and the rooms within the house. So this room has a diagram that shows the various pieces of furniture in their original position, which is extremely valuable to us to set up the room as it would have been in 1838.
Well, that's fantastic. We have a few more rooms to see on this floor here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the next room we're going to go into across the hall from us is the parlor, which as guests in the 1800s, this is the room we would first go into.
Okay, terrific.
So please come with me.
All right.
Well, welcome to the parlor. So one thing I want to tell you about this room tells us a little bit about the history of our founding as an institution. So when we were founded in 1928, we were a branch of the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, which today exists as the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh. So we existed in that capacity until 1948 when we were chartered as a separate branch and our own institution. So when this was first founded, Helen Frick, along with the members of the Historical Society, wanted to use the space to also enlighten guests about regional history. So they took the parlor and commissioned the mural we see in here to depict scenes from Western Pennsylvania's early military history. So effectively, this is a timeline that goes around the room. It starts in the corner to my left with the French and Indian War, going through Pontiac's Rebellion, and through the American Revolution.
That's very interesting. Is there any artist, do you know, that's behind the painting?
Yes. When Helen Frick opened us as a museum, she was also working with the Frick Art Collection, a museum in New York City located in the Frick Mansion there that housed his private art collection. So Helen commissioned an artist from New York, a woman named June Evans Platt, to paint this in New York City. So Platt actually painted this oil on canvas in New York with dimensions fitted for this room, where it was then shipped here and rolled on the walls as wallpaper. So this mural has been here since 1928, largely untouched.
That's very nice. Very nice. And the next room that we're heading to?
Next, we're going to see some rooms that will give us a little bit more of an insight into the Overholt's daily life. So we're going to go into a children's bedroom next.
All right.
So please come with me. Well, welcome to one of the children's bedrooms here. So when this was first built in 1838, Abraham and Mariah were raising about 8 children. And in addition to that, since they were very kind, loving Mennonite people, they also took on additional children from deceased members of their family and other children in need. So there were always many children throughout this home. So in this bedroom in particular, up to 3 children would be housed at any given time. Now, a couple things that are interesting about this home that I want to talk to you about in here. Families just did not hang up clothes vertically as we did, so they did not really store much clothes in closet spaces. They would instead rely on standalone pieces of furniture like this armoire that actually Henry Clay Frick purchased for his cousins.
Oh, very interesting. And we have one more room left to see in the house?
Absolutely. The next room we're going to go to is an exhibit that's been here since 1928. It's called the Mennonite Room. Absolutely. Come with me, please. Welcome to the Mennonite Room. So this room, before it was an exhibit, was another one of the children's bedrooms. So as I mentioned, there were many children in and out of here. But when Helen opened this as a museum, she wanted to take a few of the rooms and change them to showcase other pieces of history. This one would be to showcase her great-grandparents' roots as Mennonites in Western Pennsylvania. So you'll see For instance, cooking in this diorama. We'll see a little bit more of this as we go into the summer kitchen. Some other pieces in here are other Mennonite pieces of furniture, such as a scalloped cabinet, a hope chest, etc. And even on the hope chest is one coverlet, one of the only ones known to be woven by Abraham himself. So you'll remember Abraham is our distiller. But when he moved here first in 1803, he was a weaver by trade at the age of 16. Wouldn't be until 1810 that he had moved on from being the master weaver of the village to become the distiller. So whenever you buy a bottle of Old Overholt today, it still bears Abraham's image and the number since 1810.
Okay, well, Logan, I want to thank you very much for giving us the tour of the house, and I understand that we're now going to move outside into a different facility on the ground, so you just kind of want to tell us where we're going to?
Absolutely. So right now we're standing in front of a diorama of Mennonite cooking, but next we're going to go into the actual building where most of the cooking would be done,
okay.
The outdoors summer kitchen built in the same year as this house.
Okay, Logan, so the building that we're in now, I see a very large fireplace, I see a furnace, I see kitchen utensils. Why don't you describe where we're at now?
Absolutely. So this is the summer kitchen. This building was built in the same year as the mansion, so 1838. Summer kitchens like these are used as the primary cooking kitchens year-round for a couple reasons. So as I've stressed earlier in the tour, this is a big family. They're cooking for a lot of people who are out in the farms most of the day, and they're often cooking 2 meals at a time in the hearth. So this building generates a lot of heat. This building generates a lot of fire. So for 2 reasons, they're protecting the house. There's too much heat even in the winter for the house to accommodate, and there's a very high risk that this could catch fire while the family is asleep. Fortunately, that never happens. This building is in relatively its original state. So in here, there are just a couple pieces such as the hearth and the beehive oven for cooking. The Overholt daughters were said to cook or bake enough bread in this hearth to my right to sell to the entire village about once a week. So this is a very large capacity kitchen. The Overholts, when they lived here, you might think from the size and scale of the kitchen in here, the number of children, that they might have had servants. But as I've mentioned, Abraham and Mariah were not born into the wealth that they grew into later in life. So they lived more simple lives as traditional Mennonites would have. It would be their children and grandchildren who had grown up accustomed to this wealth, who would build mansions later on that would have servants' quarters. Abraham and Mariah rather relied on a more traditional form of servitude, which is lots of children.
My understanding too, this building, it has a washroom in the back too?
Correct. So when this building was built in 1838, we obviously don't have much in terms of running water and certainly nothing in terms of heated water. So any clothes washing that would need to happen would have to be done near a heat source and a well source for heated water to wash clothes. So that is kept in the same building here.
Okay, very interesting. And we're going to another outbuilding next?
Correct. So the next building we're going to go into is another thing that goes hand in hand with cooking and preserving food. So we're going to go into the spring house, which is one of the oldest buildings on the site.
All right, terrific.
Okay. Right now we're standing at the foot of the spring house in front of the original springs that flow out of the retaining wall here. So this building is the oldest building on the site. It was built in the same year this village was founded in 1803. It's one of only 2 structures on the property that date to this year. So this is sort of a glimpse into the early life of families who would settle and create farmsteads here. So this is well before we have electric refrigeration, so families were a little more creative with how they preserved food. So in this case, they built a structure called a spring house. And a spring house basically works as a big root cellar. So in the case of this spring house, it has these springs to my right, which were diverted from underground water sources to flow into a trough into the building. So that cold underground flowing water that went into the building was enough to lower the temperature of the building to keep food, particularly dairy products, fresh for a few extra days. Now, as we know, Abraham and Mariah expanded the village starting in about 1837, 1838, so this building underwent a few more changes. So when they built the mansion that we've just toured, they tore down the original log cabin that Abraham's father built on the site when he settled here. So they still needed a place to live. So this spring house, which was big enough to convert into a 2-bedroom cottage, was a perfect temporary housing location for them as they built the mansion. Now later on, this building underwent a couple more changes. By the 1840s, this would be the primary dwelling of the Frick family. The Fricks were a very similar family to the Overholts. They were Swiss immigrants that settled in Philadelphia and then moved here to Westmoreland County in the 1700s. So John Wilson Frick married one of Abraham's daughters, and they moved into this house here and had the first two of their children. The first would be named Mariah, after Abraham's wife. The second, in 1849, was Henry Clay Frick. And they spent the first few years of their life raising their family here.
Now, Logan, I understand we could probably do a whole separate show just on the significance of Henry Clay Frick, right? But do you want to could you just give us a background or some information of how, the importance of this figure to this region in southwestern Pennsylvania?
Sure. Henry Clay Frick becomes intertwined with the late 1800s and the early 1900s in this country, and his impact is still felt today. So Frick, as we just discussed, was born here in 1849, and he spends his first 30 years here in the village. So as a child, he is an extremely frail, sickly child. Though growing up on the mansion property here, he is still working with his grandfather at the farm, though is spared some of the more laborious chores that he just can't do. So instead, he learns these managerial skills from his elderly grandfather, from riding around the property in his buggy. And he gets his first job in the village as a clerk for the general store, and then as the clerk in the building across the street from us, the distillery. So from there, he goes on to receive a loan from another local family from Westmoreland County, the Mellons, Judge Thomas Mellon, who was the father of Andrew Mellon, the future Secretary of the Treasury. And Frick, while working as an accountant at the Broadford Distillery, his grandfather's second distillery, he opens his first two coal mines. So here in Westmoreland and Fayette counties, Frick establishes this massive coal and coke empire. Coke being a byproduct of coal that is very useful to produce, in particular, steel. So controlling most of the region's coal and coke production, he conveniently partners with Andrew Carnegie, who is establishing his steel empire. So the two controlling almost all ends of production for steel as the world is quickly becoming an industrialized place. Using up all this steel, the two of them amass incredible wealth. And after Carnegie retires, Frick becomes involved in a merger that becomes U.S. Steel, a company that is still extremely important to Western Pennsylvania's economy today.
It's just interesting, he may be a controversial figure, but there's no words that can lack the importance and the impact that he had on this region. And very interesting that he was born right here, December 19th, 1849. So I understand we have one more building left that you're going to show us. We're going to
We'll
walk
take a
down
look
to the distillery.
around the Distillery
Okay,
Museum.
perfect.
Yeah. Please come with me.
Now, moving on from the house of the birthplace of Henry Clay Frick, we moved on to the distillery. So, Logan, why don't you tell us a little bit about this building here?
Right, so we are in the Distillery Museum. Today, this houses our exhibitry related to regional whiskey production from colonial distillation through the Whiskey Rebellion all the way up through Prohibition. So in here you'll learn about how the Overholts and eventually the Fricks made their fortunes in the industrial production of whiskey from 1810 until this facility closed permanently in 1919. That's something we are changing today as we are licensed as a whiskey distillery again. In the future, guests will be able to come here and see a modern whiskey distillery in the setting of this historic place.
Now, the Whiskey Rebellion had a very, it happened in this region, had a very historical significance.
Yes.
Not just to our region, but to the United States in general. It was the first major hurdle that the new United States faced. So could you just give us kind of a brief overview and
Absolutely.
describe the significance of that event here?
So the significance of that event to this region and then to us as the Overholt Museum here, the West Overton Museum. The Whiskey Rebellion started after a whiskey excise tax in 1794. So the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, is tasked with reducing our war debt from the Revolution. One way is to put a tax on the production of whiskey. Now, for people closer to the East Coast who are making profits from industrial grade distilleries, this isn't a huge impact on them. For the rural parts of Western Pennsylvania, this is rather hurtful. The colonists here aren't really making money from selling whiskey. Rather, they're using it to barter and trade and to help ship their grains to the eastern markets that otherwise would have rotted on the way. So this uprising is a protest of that tax, and it lasts for a few years until Washington puts down the rebellion, as it was called. The tax didn't end there. It lasted for another few years until 1802 under Jefferson's newly appointed Secretary of the Treasury from Fayette County, as you know.
Albert Gallatin.
Exactly.
Now, to wrap up everything here, let's just head over to the other side of the building. We'll get some information about the events that people can do here, the things that you host. Look, we are at our final stop at today's tour. We're another display behind us, but there is so much more to see in this building and to see on these grounds. Fortunately, we just don't have the time to show everybody here right now. But if someone from the general public did want to come, what are your hours? What's the cost?
Sure. Whenever we do tours, we are open May through October for seasonal tours. In May and October, we have limited hours to Friday and Saturday, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock for tours. Between June through September, we do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, also from 10 to 3. We cut off tours at 3 just to the fact that we do many weddings in the afternoon, so there will be many wedding guests on the grounds.
Okay, and how much time should someone plan if they're going to come visit the village for?
It depends on their level of interest. I would usually plan for about 2 hours on the village property.
Okay. And my understanding is you had mentioned that you do rent the facilities out. I know that one of the buildings is open for weddings.
Yes.
Do you just want to go ahead and give us a description of what are some of the things that, that the public can rent?
Sure. We have a number of rental spaces in the village. Obviously, the most public one that a lot of people in the area are familiar with are our wedding facilities. So we have a large 250 person capacity barn that has been renovated on the inside for receptions and other events. Many people also do their ceremonies on the grounds in front of the homestead, in the gardens, etc. We also have a space in the floor below us in the Historic Distillery Museum that we call the Overholt Room. This is a smaller capacity rental hall, about 150 people. So that can be rented anywhere from small wedding receptions to corporate getaways, lectures, which we have regularly throughout the year, and other events.
Now, do you have any, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, do you have any contact information that you would like to share with us?
Sure. The best ways to keep track of us and to contact us are at our general email. That's info@westovertonvillage.org. We have a website where you can buy tickets to our events. That's westovertonvillage.org as well. And on Facebook, find us at West Overton. So we have a very active social media presence, so you can find news in the village, events, and you can get a hold of us there as well.
Okay. Logan, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day to show us the grounds and the information that you were able to share with us. Guys, that's going to be a wrap for this segment of our show. Again, I'm State Representative Ryan Warner. If you need any information from me or from my office, please you can look us up on the web. It's www.repwarner.com or repwarner/Facebook. Please, we are open to any questions. Don't hesitate to contact us. Take care.